The night it all began seemed, on the surface, like any other in our long marriage. I sat at the kitchen table, the weight of silence pressing down on the house like a suffocating fog. It wasn't the gentle kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the oppressive silence of something unspoken, something lurking in the shadows. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked relentlessly, each beat echoing like a verdict, reminding me of a life that I had once thought was secure, but now felt increasingly like a carefully staged lie. Julian, my husband of 40 years, had just returned from yet another of his endless business dinners. He didn't look simply exhausted, he looked haunted, as though carrying a secret so heavy that it was carving new lines into his face. His eyes were rimmed with fatigue, his mouth etched with guilt that had never been there before. He tossed his jacket onto the sofa with a theatrical weariness, loosened his tie as if tearing off a noose, and collapsed onto the bed without so much as a shower. The familiar scent of his cologne hung in the air, but this time it carried an intruder, an unfamiliar fragrance, sweet and floral, clinging to him like a confession written in perfume, a scent that wasn't mine. Minutes later, the low, steady hum of his snoring filled the house. Once, that sound had comforted me. Now it mocked me, lulling only a fool to sleep. I moved quietly, the well-practiced grace of a wife who had tidied up after decades of nights just like this. I picked up his jacket, his wallet, his cell phone, and his old laptop. But when I glanced at his phone, I froze. The screen was glowing. An email, something Julian had always claimed he hated using. He would laugh and say, "Juliet, this tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just make a call." Yet here it was, an email, right in front of me, beckoning like a sinister omen. Against every instinct, yet unable to stop myself, I opened it. The message was short, almost cruel in its simplicity. "You were incredible tonight, Dad Didinoy." My breath caught in my throat. The word Dad echoed in my mind, cruel and impossible. Who would dare call him that, and in such a tone of tender intimacy? My hand trembled as I scrolled, searching for more. But there was nothing, only a strange, meaningless email address, a jumble of characters that revealed no answers. A shiver coursed through me, not from cold, but from dread so deep it felt like ice in my bones. I glanced at the bedroom door, where Julian slept soundly, unaware, untroubled, while my world tilted beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest, guilty and frantic, as if I were the thief, not him. I placed the phone back exactly as it had been, nearly dropping it with how much my hands shook. I moved mechanically, folding clothes, straightening pillows, but inside, something was unraveling. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just fatigue or paranoia. This was the first crack in the silence that had held our marriage together. And soon, the entire facade would crumble. The next morning, the weight of that email had not lifted. If anything, it grew heavier, gnawing at me with every tick of the clock. I stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast the way I always had, 2 fried eggs, buttered toast, and a cup of strong black coffee. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind was trapped in the poisonous loop of that single sentence. "You were incredible tonight, Dad, Edeni." Julian came down the stairs looking tired, his hair ruffled, his eyes still cloudy with sleep. He picked up the coffee cup, took a sip, and set it down half full. "I have an important meeting today," he said in that husky, rehearsed tone, one I had heard countless times before. He didn't look me in the eye. I studied his face carefully, searching for any crack in his performance. He was too good at this, the casual lies, the easy composure. My blood ran cold as I forced myself to nod with a polite smile. "Of course. Be careful," I replied softly, though inside I wanted to scream. "Where? With whom? In San Antonio again?" He left after giving me a perfunctory pat on the shoulder, a gesture that once might have meant affection, but now felt like an afterthought. The door closed, and once again, silence filled the room. Only this time, it was no longer a fog, but a suffocating cage. I began clearing the table, washing dishes one by one, letting the repetitive rhythm anchor me while my thoughts spiraled. I couldn't survive on suspicion alone. I needed proof, something undeniable. That's when I remembered Mrs. Miller, a woman I had known since the early days of running my bakery. Years ago, she had once whispered to me over coffee, "Juliet, if you ever need to know the truth about your husband, I know someone discreet. A private investigator. His name is Thomas. Reliable, invisible, but I hope you'll never need him." My pride recoiled at the thought, but desperation won. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and dialed her number. When she answered, her voice was warm but cautious. "Juliet? It's been so long. How are you?" I swallowed hard, the words bitter on my tongue. "Mrs. Miller, I need Thomas's number. Please. I need to know the truth." There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost feel her hesitation, her pity. Then finally she spoke. "Juliet, did Julian do something?" I closed my eyes, refusing to let my pride spill over the phone. "I just need to be sure," I whispered. "Please." Within the hour, a message arrived from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Roberts, I understand. Let's meet today at noon at the cafe downtown. Please don't worry. I will help you." His words were short, professional, but they were a lifeline thrown into the storm. For the first time in days, I felt my breath steady. But in my heart, I knew. Whatever truth Thomas uncovered, it would change my life forever. At noon sharp, I arrived at the cafe downtown, a small place tucked between old brick buildings. Its wooden tables were worn smooth by years of customers, and the air smelled richly of roasted coffee beans. Normally, that scent comforted me. Today, it felt strangely foreign, like a memory from another life. I chose a secluded corner table, where the light from the window barely touched me. I wanted to disappear, to be a shadow. A few minutes later, a man entered, a stocky figure, in a simple light blue shirt, his steps steady, his gaze sharp yet calm. He scanned the room, and when his eyes met mine, I felt he could see straight through me, through every fragile layer I was trying so desperately to hold together. "Mrs. Roberts?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. I nodded, sliding a flash drive across the table with trembling hands. On it, I had saved the photos I'd taken, the restaurant receipt, the suspicious email, the damning tube of lubricant, even the napkins soaked with that unfamiliar perfume. This is all I have," I whispered, my throat tight. "I don't know what's going on, but I think my husband is cheating on me." The words tasted like ash, burning as they left my lips. Thomas plugged the drive into his phone, his face unreadable as he scrolled through the images. He wrote notes in a small leather notebook, each stroke precise, his silence more unsettling than any words he could have spoken. Finally, he looked up, his eyes steady, professional, but with a flicker of compassion. "Mrs. Roberts," he said, "I understand. I'll begin following Mr. Roberts this afternoon. Don't worry, I'll keep you updated. Whatever the truth is, you will have it." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I managed only a faint, "Thank you." "Go home," he advised gently, "and don't do anything that could make him suspicious. Leave the rest to me." I walked out of the cafe into the bustling crowd, but I felt lonelier than I ever had in my entire life. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of shared dreams, now balanced on the edge of betrayal. My anchor, my rock, the man I had trusted above all else, I was now paying a stranger to follow him. The irony twisted in my chest like a knife. That night, as I sat in the quiet bakery reviewing delivery invoices, my phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. My pulse thundered in my ears as I opened it. It was a photo. Julian, dressed in his favorite light blue shirt, entering a restaurant. But he wasn't alone. His hand was entwined with a woman's. My breath hitched. I zoomed in. The woman's face came into focus. It was Allison, my daughter-in-law. For a moment, the world simply stopped. My hands trembled as I held the phone, staring at the image that shattered everything I thought I knew. Allison, my son Daniel's wife, the woman I had welcomed into our family, taught to bake our cherished family flan, embraced as a daughter, and Julian, my husband of 4 decades, walking beside her, holding her hand like a lover. Thomas sent more photos. In one, they were seated in a dimly lit corner of the restaurant, the table adorned with flowers and candles. Allison leaned in, her smile wide, her red lipstick shining under the warm glow. Julian raised his glass to hers, his eyes soft, his gaze filled with a tenderness I hadn't seen directed at me in years, not even when we were newly married. Not even when I still had long hair flowing under the San Diego Sunday. The realization struck me like a physical blow. The look of genuine adoration I once thought belonged only to me now belonged to her. Later that night, another message arrived. This time, it wasn't photos, it was a video. My heart hammered as I pressed play, hands trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. In the recording, Allison leaned close to Julian's ear, whispering something that made him laugh. His laugh was loud, carefree, unfamiliar, a sound that felt like a stranger's voice. She touched his arm as though it were the most natural thing in the world, her eyes sparkling. When they stood to leave, Julian held the door for her, his gestures gentle, practiced, unmistakably intimate. I replayed the video again and again, even as it tore me apart. Each time felt like another stab in the chest. The girl I had embraced like a daughter, and the man I had built my entire life with, betraying not only me but Daniel, our son, her husband. I sat frozen in the bakery, surrounded by the comforting smell of sweet pastries, yet I felt nothing but nausea. Memories flooded me. The nights Julian had helped me carry sacks of flour when the bakery was new, his proud smile when I signed my first hotel contract, the promises whispered under the stars. All of it now seemed like a cruel joke, a beautiful lie built on shifting sand. As dawn approached, I carefully saved every image, every video, onto a flash drive, labeling each file with date, time, and place. My hands moved automatically, but my heart was breaking with every click. There was no denying it anymore. Julian wasn't just unfaithful, he was entangled in something far darker with our own daughter-in-law, and I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I was back in the bakery kitchen, the scent of flour and vanilla rising with the dawn. Usually, that fragrance brought me peace, but now it was hollow, almost mocking. I held the day's delivery orders in one hand, my mind still replaying the images Thomas had sent. My husband and my daughter-in-law sitting together like lovers, laughing together, touching each other. Just as I signed a delivery invoice, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I wiped my hands nervously and glanced at the screen. A new message from Thomas. "Mrs. Roberts, I'm sending more evidence." My breath caught. I opened the message, bracing myself. A series of photographs appeared. The first showed Julian in his usual gray shirt, walking out of a law office near the main plaza. At his side was Allison, wearing a beige dress and oversized sunglasses, as if she believed those dark lenses could hide her betrayal. They weren't walking like in-laws. Their closeness, the way their shoulders brushed, their bodies tilted toward one another, it was the unmistakable language of intimacy. Another photo followed. This time they stood in front of a gleaming 4-star hotel, the golden letters on the sign reflected in the glass doors. My eyes desperately searched for any detail that could contradict what I was seeing, some shred of hope, but there was none. Then came the video. I pressed play, my pulse thundering in my ears. From a distance, the camera caught them on the hotel's third-floor balcony. Julian's arm circled Allison's waist. She rested her head against his shoulder, her long hair swaying softly in the breeze. And then it happened. A kiss. Quick, stolen, yet devastating. The final shred of denial I had clung to burned away in that instant. I replayed the clip frame by frame, torturing myself with every second. The curtain of the hotel room opened slightly, and Allison rushed back into Julian's arms, her face radiant with the joy of a woman in love. My stomach twisted. That smile was not for my son. It was for my husband. Moments later, Thomas sent another message. "They rented the room for the afternoon, likely staying the night. I will continue watching." I stared at the words, my throat tightening as though a rope had been pulled around it. Hours earlier, Julian had told me, "Juliet, I won't be home tonight." A potential partner flew in from out of town. He had said it in his sweetest tone, the same voice he'd used on me for decades. But now I knew the truth. His partner was Allison. And the business wasn't contracts or hotels. It was betrayal. I saved the new files onto the flash drive, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. Each photo, each video was another nail sealing the coffin of our marriage. Julian's tenderness toward Allison in those images, his hand stroking her hair, his gaze brimming with affection, was the same tenderness he once showed me more than 30 years ago, back when we were young, under the San Diego stars, whispering promises of forever. Now, all I could see was lies. Lies wrapped in perfume and hotel curtains, lies that carried the face of my daughter-in-law. And I knew this was far from over. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Julian claimed he was too tired to talk. He had gone to bed early, reeking of alcohol, muttering about a difficult partner. His voice was strained but practiced, the kind of excuse that once would have earned my sympathy. Now it only deepened the pit in my stomach. When I was sure he was asleep, my phone buzzed again. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. My hands shook as I answered. "Mrs. Roberts." His voice was low, cautious, almost apologetic. I recorded something. Their conversation outside the hotel, in the parking lot. I had special equipment. They didn't notice. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, bracing myself. Minutes later, the file arrived. I put on my headphones, heart pounding, and pressed play. First came Allison's voice, sweet once, but now sharp and cold, dripping with ambition. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want that whole chain of stores already. I want that old hag out of the house." My stomach lurched. She was talking about me. The old hag she mocked was the same woman who had taught her how to cook rice, who had welcomed her like a daughter. Then Julian's voice followed, low, confident, and cruelly familiar. "Don't worry about those papers. Juliet doesn't know anything. Leave it to me. She trusts me too much." The words struck harder than any physical blow. My trust, 40 years of it, was his weapon. This wasn't just an affair. This was a conspiracy. They weren't content with betraying Daniel. They wanted everything: my bakery, my home, my life's work. I sat frozen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The bakery chain, the countless nights kneading dough until my hands blistered, the endless deliveries to build my reputation. Julian had never carried those burdens. And now he wanted to steal it, hand in hand with Allison. I carefully copied the audio file to my flash drive, labeling it with the date and time. My movements were calm, deliberate, even as my insides trembled with rage. Every piece of evidence was another stone in the fortress I was building, not for protection, but for battle. The next morning, as I poured coffee in the bakery's back room, another message from Thomas arrived. Photos, this time. Julian and Allison, sitting inside his car. A thick stack of papers lay between them. Allison held a red pen, circling words, making notes, while Julian watched with a smile of approval. Thomas's text followed. I overheard them. "They're planning to use a contact at the notary's office to make the transfer official. I'll dig deeper." I zoomed in on the photo. Though the text was blurred, I didn't need to read the words to know the truth. They were plotting to erase me. The woman I called daughter, the man I trusted with my soul, together, against me. My heart burned with fury, but my hands remained steady. If they thought I was blind, they were wrong. I would see everything. I would know everything, and when the time came, I would be ready. That evening, we sat across from each other in the dim yellow light of our kitchen. The same small table where we had shared thousands of meals now felt like a stage, every word rehearsed, every gesture part of a sinister performance. Julian ate slowly, sipping wine, his expression calm, almost smug, as though nothing in the world was amiss. I could barely swallow my food. All I could hear, echoing in my head, was Allison's voice from the recording. "I want that old hag out of the house." And Julian's cold reply, "She trusts me too much." Halfway through the meal, Julian set his fork down and looked at me, his eyes carrying that same false warmth that had once fooled me. "Juliet," he said casually, "I have to sign some important business papers this week. They're complicated. Maybe you should look them over for me." The words made bile rise in my throat. Those papers were the very contracts Allison had spoken of. He was testing me, trying to pull me into his trap, to make me complicit in the theft of my own life. I forced a faint smile, keeping my voice calm. Yes, of course. I'll look at them later. I'm tired tonight. He seemed satisfied, nodding, taking another sip of wine as though nothing were wrong. But behind his mask of ease, I saw the predator, the man waiting for the right moment to strike. He drank more, his face flushing red, his words slurring as he rambled on about a difficult client he'd met that day. I nodded, feigning interest, though inside I wanted to scream. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I'm that stupid? When he finally staggered to the bedroom, leaving his car keys gleaming on the nightstand, something inside me shifted. For the first time in days, I felt not just anger, not just despair, but resolve. I stared at the keys, my pulse quickening. They weren't just keys to a car. They were keys to the truth, keys to my revenge. I rose slowly, each step toward the bedroom heavy with determination. I picked up the keys, clutching them tight, and walked into the night. The garage was silent, the air thick with gasoline and betrayal. Julian's old SUV sat waiting, a silent witness to his secrets. I opened the door, turned on my flashlight, and began to search. And what I found confirmed everything. The beam of my flashlight swept across the interior of Julian's SUV, illuminating every corner like a scalpel cutting into flesh. Loose coins glinted on the floor, an empty water bottle rolled beneath the seat. At first, it all seemed ordinary, almost disappointingly mundane. But when I reached for the glove compartment, my hand brushed against something slick, plastic. I pulled it out, and my heart froze. A tube of lubricant. Used, the cap crusted with residue. My breath caught, sharp and ragged, as if the air itself had turned toxic. Julian and I hadn't been intimate in years. His excuses had always been the same: age, fatigue, stress. He had convinced me to stop asking, to stop hoping, and yet here was proof indisputable, vile proof that his desire had not disappeared at all. He had simply saved it for someone else. I shoved it back into the compartment, my hands trembling violently. I scrubbed my palms against a napkin until the skin stung raw, as if I could wash away the filth of touching his betrayal. But no soap could cleanse this wound. Driven by a grim determination, I searched further. Under the back seat, I found crumpled napkins drenched in a sickly, sweet floral perfume. Not mine, not a man's. It was bold, defiant Allison's scent, I realized with a jolt. Her signature fragrance that had once seemed innocent, now screaming like an insult in the shadows of my garage. I snapped photos of everything: the tube, the napkins, the damning evidence of a life they thought they had hidden. My hands moved with mechanical precision, even as my stomach turned. Closing the car door, I leaned against the cold metal, my pulse hammering. The weight of it all pressed down on me, heavier than any sack of flour I had ever carried in the bakery. When I finally returned to the kitchen, I found Julian's keys gleaming once again on the nightstand, where I placed them carefully. He would never know I had touched them, never know that his secrets were no longer his alone. I sat in the living room with an old book in my hands, pretending to read beneath the weak lamplight, but the words blurred before my eyes. My mind spun in endless circles: Allison's perfume, Julian's lies, the flash of that red heart in the email. And beneath it all, one thought beat louder than my racing pulse. They thought they could deceive me. They thought I was weak. But I was watching now, and I would not remain silent. I barely slept that night. My body lay still under the covers, but my mind twisted itself into knots, replaying every image, every whisper of proof. By dawn, my pillow was damp, not from sleep, but from silent tears that had slipped out when I wasn't strong enough to stop them. When morning came, I forced myself into routine. I brewed coffee, fried eggs, buttered toast, the simple breakfast Julian liked. My hands moved with practiced ease, but inside I was hollow. Julian shuffled into the kitchen, his hair mussed, his eyes half closed. He picked up his coffee, sipped, and set it down, barely half finished. "I've got an important meeting today," he mumbled, the same line he'd fed me 1,000 times. He didn't look at me as he said it, didn't even bother to pretend anymore. I studied him across the table, my chest tightening. His lies dripped so easily, so smoothly, as though I were invisible. I forced a small smile, swallowing the rage that burned like acid in my throat. "All right," I said softly. "Be careful." He gave me a pat on the shoulder, an empty gesture, and left. The door clicked shut, leaving me in silence once more. I stared at the untouched coffee, steam curling upward like smoke from a slow-burning fire. I couldn't keep circling suspicion. I needed something undeniable, something that could expose them beyond all denial. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her Mrs. Miller, my old friend, the one who had once spoken of a private investigator. My pride screamed against it, but desperation drowned it out. I pressed the call button. Each ring was a drumbeat, each second heavier than the last. Finally, she answered, her familiar voice warm but cautious. "Juliet? Oh, my dear, it's been too long. How are you?" I swallowed hard, shame clinging to every word. "Mrs. Miller, do you still know the investigator you once told me about?" My voice faltered. "I need him." There was a pause, a silence weighted with concern. "Juliet," she whispered, "what's going on? Did Julian?" I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud. My pride was too raw, too bruised. "Please," I murmured, "just help me. I need to know." Her tone shifted, firm and decisive. "All right, his name is Thomas. I'll send you his number right away." Moments later, a message appeared on my phone from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Roberts, I understand. Please meet me at noon today, downtown cafe. Don't worry, I will help you." I stared at the words until they blurred. A stranger was about to step into my life, a man whose job was to reveal truths no one wanted to face. And for the first time in 40 years, I felt the sharp edge of betrayal cutting so deeply that even pride couldn't protect me. I whispered to myself, a vow spoken only to the silence of my kitchen. Whatever the truth is, I will face it. At noon sharp, I arrived at the small cafe Thomas had chosen. It was a modest place with scuffed wooden tables and the lingering aroma of roasted beans. Normally, I might have found it comforting. But that day, every sound, the clink of cups, the murmur of conversations felt muffled, distant, as though I were walking through someone else's life. I chose a corner seat away from the light, my hands clenched around the strap of my purse. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to vanish. Then he appeared. A man of medium height, sturdy build, dressed in a simple blue shirt. His face was calm, but his eyes deep, analytical, seemed to notice everything at once. When those eyes landed on me, I felt exposed, as though he could already read every secret I was trying so hard to hide. "Mrs. Roberts?" His voice was steady, almost gentle. I nodded, sliding a flash drive across the table with trembling fingers. "This is all I have," I whispered. "Emails, receipts, photographs, and things I found in his car." My throat tightened. "I don't know for sure, but I think my husband is cheating on me." The words nearly broke me. Speaking them aloud made the betrayal more real, heavier than before. Thomas plugged the flash drive into his phone and examined the files. His face revealed nothing. He jotted notes into a small leather-bound notebook, his pen scratching steadily, methodically. His silence unnerved me. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Roberts, I'll begin surveillance this afternoon. I'll track his movements, watch who he meets, where he goes. I'll send you updates and evidence as soon as I have them." Relief and despair tangled inside me. I whispered, "Thank you." He leaned back slightly, his eyes softening just enough to reveal a flicker of empathy. "Go home," he said quietly. "And above all, don't let him suspect anything. Leave the rest to me." I walked out of the cafe and into the bustling city street, but the world felt empty. 40 years of marriage built on trust, on shared laughter and sleepless nights, now placed in the hands of a stranger with knowing eyes. That evening, I sat alone in the bakery office. Invoices spread before me, but I couldn't focus. The smell of yeast and sugar clung to the air, usually a source of comfort, but not that night. My phone buzzed on the desk. My pulse quickened as I reached for it. A message from Thomas. I opened it. A single photograph filled the screen. Julian, in his favorite light blue shirt, entering a fancy restaurant. his hand clasped tightly around another's. I zoomed in, my heart stuttering. The face came into focus. Allison, my daughter-in-law. The image seared itself into my mind. My fingers trembled as I zoomed in closer, though I already knew what I was seeing. Allison, my son's wife, the woman I had welcomed into our family, taught to bake our flan, hugged like a daughter. And there she was, her hand entwined with Julian's, her smile radiant with the joy of a woman in love. More photos followed. In one, they sat at a candlelit table tucked away in a secluded corner of the restaurant. Allison leaned toward him, her hair spilling over her shoulders, her lipstick shining red under the glow. Julian raised his glass, toasting her, his eyes tender, filled with an adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in decades. It wasn't the look of a father-in-law. It was the look of a man in love. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, nausea rising in my throat. 40 years of marriage dissolved in a single moment of clarity. The love I once thought belonged to me alone was now hers. Then came a video. My hands shook as I pressed play, bracing myself for the pain I knew was coming. In the recording, Allison leaned close to Julian's ear, whispering words that made him laugh loud, carefree, a sound so foreign it made my skin crawl. His hand rested lightly on her arm, his eyes glittering under the restaurant lights. When they rose to leave, he opened the door for her, his gestures tender and practiced, not as a father, but as a lover. I replayed the video again and again, torturing myself with each frame. The daughter-in-law I had embraced like blood, and the man I had built a life beside, betraying not just me, but Daniel, my son, her husband. Around me, the bakery remained still, the scent of pastries filling the air, yet I felt nothing but emptiness. The memories of Julian helping me in the early days, carrying sacks of flour, celebrating my first hotel contract, they crumbled like stale bread. All those moments, all those promises, now revealed as fragile lies. With steady hands, I saved the files onto my flash drive, naming each one by date, time, and place. I would not let myself doubt again. The evidence was clear, undeniable, unshakable. They thought they were clever. They thought I was blind. But now I knew, and this was only the beginning. The following morning, I returned to the bakery, trying to hold myself together beneath the mask of routine. The familiar scent of warm bread and vanilla usually wrapped around me like comfort, but today it was a hollow echo. I signed off invoices, arranged trays of pastries, and greeted customers with the same polite smile I had worn for years. Yet beneath it all, a storm raged silently. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed again, another message from Thomas. My heart lurched as I opened it. A new set of photographs appeared. Julian, dressed in his gray shirt, leaving a law office downtown. Allison walked beside him, her sunglasses shielding half her face. They weren't walking apart like in-laws should. They were close. Too close, their shoulders brushing, their steps in perfect rhythm. The next photo showed them standing at the entrance of a 4-star hotel, the kind with glass doors that reflected the sky and gold letters gleaming above. My stomach twisted. But Thomas wasn't finished. A video followed. My hand shook as I pressed play. From a distance, the lens captured them on a 3rd-floor balcony. Julian's arm draped around Allison's waist. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, her long hair stirring gently in the breeze. And then came the moment that shattered any lingering denial. They kissed. It was brief, but unmistakable. A kiss without hesitation, without shame. I gasped, the sound torn from me like a sob. I replayed the clip again and again, hoping my eyes were lying. But there it was. The man I had trusted with my life, kissing the woman my son trusted with his. The curtain inside the room shifted, and I saw Allison reappear, rushing into Julian's arms with a joy that could only belong to a woman deeply in love. Her laughter was soft, filled with a warmth that should have been Daniel's, not Julian's. Moments later, another message arrived from Thomas. "They've rented a room for the night. I'll continue watching." I stared at the words, my throat so tight I could hardly breathe. Just hours earlier, Julian had told me in his sweetest voice, "Juliet, I won't be home tonight. A potential partner came in from out of town." That partner wasn't a business contact. It was Allison. And the deal wasn't about contracts, it was betrayal, written in stolen touches and whispered lies. I copied the photos and video onto my flash drive, my hands steady despite the quaking inside. Each file was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. And yet, as I looked at Julian's tender gaze toward Allison, the way he caressed her hair, the way she smiled up at him, I realized with a crushing clarity, he hadn't just betrayed me. He had given away the very love he once swore was mine alone. The night sky outside the bakery's window blurred through my tears. My marriage, my family, my life, it was all unraveling, and there was no turning back. That night, I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen of our house, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Julian had returned late, staggering through the door with alcohol on his breath. He muttered something about a difficult partner, his voice scratchy, his eyes red. He collapsed into bed without a second glance in my direction, as though his betrayal were neatly hidden behind the curtain of exhaustion. I poured myself a glass of water, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to hurl the glass at him, to demand the truth. But instead, I kept my voice calm, my mask intact. Rest, I told him. You have work tomorrow. Minutes later, his snores filled the room. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Thomas again. His voice, when I answered, was low, urgent. Mrs. Roberts. I recorded their conversation in the hotel parking lot. I used special equipment. They didn't notice. I'll send it now. My pulse hammered as the audio file appeared on the screen. I put on my headphones, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped the phone. Allison's voice came first, soft, girlish, but dripping with venom. Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want the bakery chain already. I want that old hag out of the house. The words sliced through me. Old hag. That was what she called me. The woman I had welcomed into my home, taught family recipes, embraced like a daughter. Then came Julian's voice, calm, confident, cutting deeper than any knife. Don't worry about those papers. Juliet doesn't know anything. Leave it in my hands. She trusts me too much. The room seemed to spin around me. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling as though I were being stabbed from the inside. 40 years of trust, used as a weapon against me. This wasn't just an affair. It was a scheme. They wanted my bakery, my house, everything I had built with sweat and sleepless nights. Allison didn't just want Julian. She wanted my life. I copied the audio to my flash drive, labeling it carefully, my hands steadier than my heart, date, time, location. If I had to destroy them, I would do it with precision. For the first time, the fear in me was eclipsed by something colder, sharper, rage. Julian thought I was blind. Allison thought I was weak, but I was neither, and I had just decided I would not only uncover the truth, I would make them choke on it. The following evening, I sat across from Julian at our kitchen table, the yellow bulb above us casting a sickly glow on his face. He chewed his food slowly, sipping wine with the practiced ease of a man who believed himself untouchable. I could still hear Allison's voice from the recording, "I want that old hag out of the house," ringing in my ears. Every time I looked at Julian, I saw not a husband, but a conspirator. Halfway through the meal, he cleared his throat, setting his fork down. "Juliet," he said casually, his voice deceptively warm. "I'll need to sign some important documents this week. They're complicated. Maybe you should take a look before I do." My pulse quickened, but I forced my face to remain calm. These were the very contracts Allison had urged him to rush. He was baiting me, trying to weave me into his scheme. I smiled faintly, feigning fatigue. "Yes, I'll look at them later. I'm tired tonight." He nodded, satisfied, and poured himself another glass of wine. Behind his calm smile, I saw the predator. He drank heavily, his face reddening, his words slurring as he rambled about a difficult client. I nodded at the right times, though inside I wanted to scream, "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I'm that blind?" Finally, he staggered to the bedroom, leaving his car keys on the nightstand. They glinted in the dim light, a silent invitation. I stared at them, my heart pounding. Those keys weren't just to a car. They were to the truth, to the evidence I needed, to my revenge. Slowly, silently, I rose. Every step felt heavy, yet certain. I picked up the keys, my fingers curling around them, and slipped into the night. The garage was quiet, the air heavy with gasoline and faint perfume. His SUV waited, a silent accomplice to his betrayal. I opened the door, turned on my flashlight, and began to search. And what I uncovered confirmed everything I feared and more. The flashlight's beam swept across the SUV's interior once again. I searched every corner, every hidden compartment, my breath shallow and uneven. Loose change, an empty bottle, the ordinary clutter of a man's car. But then my hand closed around it, the same tube of lubricant, cap smeared with residue, like a grotesque monument to their betrayal. I held it in the dim light, my stomach lurching. My mind screamed questions I already knew the answers to. Why? With whom? How long? But the truth sat cold and silent in my palm. Julian hadn't lost desire. He had simply saved it for Allison. A rage unlike any I had ever known flooded me, but alongside it came a clarity. I put the tube back exactly where I had found it, wiping my hands raw on a napkin. My next movements weren't those of a broken wife. They were the calculated actions of a woman preparing for war. I went back into the house, straight to the tool drawer. My fingers closed around a small tube of industrial superglue, the kind I'd once used to fix a chair leg in the bakery. I stared at it for a moment, and then, with calm precision, I returned to the car. Under the weak light of my phone, I unscrewed the lubricant's cap. My hands didn't shake anymore. Drop by drop, I filled it with the clear, deadly glue. I wiped the nozzle clean, shook it lightly, tested it just enough to be sure. To any unsuspecting eye, it looked exactly the same. I smiled faintly, though a storm raged inside me. This wasn't vengeance born of cruelty. It was the only justice I had left. I placed the tube back in the glove compartment, adjusted the seat and floor mat exactly as they had been, and closed the car door softly. In the trunk, I discovered a discarded condom wrapper, crumpled bags, traces of a life they lived in shadows. I snapped photos, each one another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. Back inside, I returned the keys to the nightstand, right where Julian had left them. Then I sat in the living room with an open book, pretending to read beneath the dim light, but I didn't see the words. I only saw the plan forming in my mind, sharp and unstoppable. Julian stumbled into the kitchen later, rubbing his eyes. "Still not sleeping, Juliet?" he muttered groggily. I smiled gently, closing the book. "Just reading a little. Go back to bed." He nodded, too tired or too arrogant to suspect a thing. Minutes later, he was snoring again. I sat alone in the silence, staring at the shadows on the wall. He thought I was weak, blind, powerless. But he didn't know that I had already taken the first step toward his ruin. At dawn, I rose before Julian, slipping quietly into the bakery to prepare dough. My hands pressed into the flour with more force than necessary, every need echoing the anger churning in my chest. By the time I returned home for breakfast, I had already crafted the next step of my plan. Julian was sitting at the table with a cup of black coffee. I placed a plate of eggs and toast before him, then sat across with a calm I didn't truly feel. "Julian," I said softly, "I have to travel to Nashville tomorrow to sign a contract with a new partner. I'll be home late. Can you handle dinner?" For a split second, his eyes lit up not with concern, but with relief. He reached for my hand, squeezing it with a tenderness that felt hollow. "A big contract?" he asked, his voice warm, but his lips curved in a way that betrayed him. "Don't worry. Go ahead. I'll take care of everything." That flicker in his eyes pierced me deeper than any blade. He wanted me gone. He needed me gone. I smiled faintly, playing my part. "Thank you. I'll call if I get back late." As he left for the office, I noticed he had left his phone on the table. It lit up with a missed call, Allison Thomas. My chest tightened. Before I could touch it, Julian rushed back, grabbing it quickly with a forced smile. "Forgot it," he muttered, and he was gone again. The mask was slipping. He no longer cared to hide. That night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep, but every sense was sharpened. Around midnight, his snoring stopped. I heard the faint glow of his phone screen, the creak of the floorboards as he tiptoed out. Quietly I followed, hiding behind the heavy living room curtain. He stood by the window, his voice low, urgent. "Yes, of course. Come to the house tomorrow. We don't need hotels anymore. Juliet has to leave town. She'll be gone all day." From the other end came Allison's giggle, soft and triumphant. "That's perfect, Dad. Finally, we can relax." Julian chuckled, his voice dripping with eagerness. "Yes, come early. I'll be waiting." I bit down hard on my lip, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth as rage consumed me. They weren't just stealing behind my back anymore. They planned to turn my home, my sanctuary, into their playground. I slipped back into the bedroom, my resolve hardening like steel. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out Daniel's old recorder, the one he had used in college. I fitted it with new batteries, tested the microphone, and set it on continuous recording. I hid it behind a photo frame on the bedroom shelf, a smiling family picture from Daniel and Allison's wedding day. The irony stung so sharply, I almost choked. The recorder blinked silently, its tiny light hidden by smiling faces frozen in time. Tomorrow, it would capture the truth. Not just whispers, not just stolen touches, but their betrayal in the raw. As I slipped back under the covers beside Julian, he shifted, muttering in his sleep. His hand brushed against mine, a gesture that once would have comforted me. Now, it only filled me with loathing. I closed my eyes, but not to rest. Tomorrow, the fire would begin. At 5 a.m., I slipped out of bed while Julian still snored softly, blissfully unaware. The house was quiet, painted in faint streaks of streetlight that filtered through the curtains. I moved into the kitchen, every step deliberate. On the stove, I placed a skillet of oil, then tied a thin string to the igniter and ran it to the window, fastening it to an old coffee can weighted with coins. A small tug from outside would be enough to spark a flame, sending black smoke pouring into the air. I tested it once. The oil hissed, smoke curling upward like a dark serpent. I quickly shut it off, satisfied. It would be ready when I needed it. Julian stirred as I returned to the bedroom. I leaned over him, whispering in the same calm voice I had used for decades. "I need to catch the early bus. I'll be home late after the contract signing." He opened his eyes briefly, kissed the pillow, and murmured, "Be careful, Juliet. Call me if you need anything." Then he rolled over, sinking back into sleep. I looked at him one last time, the man I had trusted, the man who had vowed to protect me. Now a stranger lying in my bed, planning to destroy everything I had built. I left, but not for the station. Instead, I crossed the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She opened the door in her robe, her eyes full of concern. "Juliet, what's wrong? Where are you going with your purse?" I forced a smile. "I just need a place to sit for a while. May I stay here?" She frowned, puzzled, but nodded. Moments later, I sat at her window with a steaming cup of coffee, staring at my own front door. My pulse raced, but my face remained calm. Around 10 a.m., a taxi pulled up. Allison stepped out in a floral dress, her sunglasses barely concealing her nervous excitement. Julian hurried her inside, glancing up and down the street like a guilty teenager. I slipped on my headphones and opened the recording app connected to the hidden device in the bedroom. At once, the sound of their laughter filled my ears. The clink of glasses, the rustle of sheets, the whispers of betrayal echoing through my own home. Then Allison's voice, cruel and cutting. "The old hag is gone, right?" I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Moments later came the sound of a bed creaking, followed by Allison's startled cry. "What the hell? We're stuck!" Panic laced her voice. Julian growled back, "Shut up, let me see." A slow, cold smile crept across my face. It was time. I tugged the string. The stove ignited, flames leaping into the oil. Thick, black smoke poured from the kitchen window, curling into the sky like a signal. Outside, neighbors shouted, "Juliet's house is on fire!" Phones rang, footsteps pounded, panic spread. From across the street, Mrs. Peterson clutched my hand. Her eyes were wide, but she said nothing. She knew. And then I heard the sirens. The fire truck skidded to a halt in front of my house. My heart cracked as I saw Daniel, my son, jump from the driver's seat in his fire chief uniform, his face set with grim determination. "Quick!" he shouted. "There may be people inside." The neighbors crowded, gasping, whispering, waiting for the truth to burst into daylight. And I knew the moment had come. Julian and Allison's secret was about to burn in front of everyone. The sound of the sledgehammer echoed like thunder as Daniel and his men broke down the front door. Smoke billowed into the yard, curling around the neighbors who had gathered, their voices rising in a mix of panic and curiosity. I stayed by Mrs. Peterson's side, clutching my coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. My son was inside that house, stepping into the truth I had prepared for him, though God knows I never wanted him to see it this way. Through my headphones, I heard everything the recorder picked up: Julian's furious shouts, Allison's sobbing pleas. "Do something, Julian. I can't move." "Shut up. Stop screaming," he barked, his voice ragged with desperation. The chaos from inside reached the crowd outside. Firefighters rushed through the halls, their boots pounding against the hardwood. Then came Daniel's voice, sharp, trembling with disbelief. What is this?" he stammered. A second of silence, followed by the gasp of another firefighter. "Oh my God." I closed my eyes, imagining the scene, the bed, the sheets, Julian and Allison glued together in their shame, naked, exposed, caught in the act they thought no one would ever see. The whispers from the crowd spread like wildfire. A woman cried out, "It's Julian and Allison, his daughter-in-law." Another voice followed, dripping with disgust. "What a disgrace." Neighbors clutched their mouths in shock. Some shook their heads, others muttered prayers, but a few "God forgive them" laughed. Inside, Daniel's voice broke through the chaos, louder this time. Silence. It wasn't just a command to his men. It was his final plea to preserve what little dignity his family had left. But it was too late. The truth had spilled into the street, staining everything it touched. The firefighters emerged minutes later, carrying Julian and Allison out on stretchers. Their bodies were covered hastily with sheets, but the shame couldn't be hidden. Allison wept uncontrollably, her voice hoarse. "Please, do something. It burns." Julian groaned beside her, his once commanding voice reduced to pitiful murmurs. "Don't let anyone see us." But everyone had already seen. The crowd erupted shouts of disgust, whispers of betrayal, bursts of cruel laughter. 40 years of marriage, and this is what he does? Someone muttered. Another sneered. With his own daughter-in-law, God help us. I stood there among them, feigning shock, as if I had just rushed back from the station. My eyes stayed fixed on Daniel. He stood in the yard, pale as a ghost, his arms limp at his sides. His teammates avoided his gaze, their silence more damning than any words. My son wasn't just watching his father and his wife being carried out in disgrace. He was watching the very foundation of his family collapse in front of him. And I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The ambulance's siren wailed as it carried Julian and Allison away, their bodies still bound by humiliation more than by glue. The crowd lingered outside, buzzing with whispers, curses, and pity. Some shook their heads in disgust, while others laughed openly, unable to contain their fascination with the scandal. I walked quietly behind Mrs. Peterson as she guided me toward the hospital. She didn't ask questions. Her silence was a shield, but her eyes sharp, knowing told me she suspected far more than I was willing to admit. Inside the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and fear. I sat in the hallway, staring at the floor tiles as nurses hurried past. Hours dragged like years. At last, a doctor emerged, sweat gleaming on his forehead. His voice was low, almost embarrassed. "Mrs. Roberts, we managed to separate them. Fortunately, the damage isn't severe. They'll only need ointment for their skin." I nodded, feigning relief. "Thank you, doctor." The nurse handed me 2 tubes of medication, her young face filled with pity. "This must be very difficult for you, ma'am. I'm so sorry." I forced a weak smile, but my fingers tightened around my purse where I had hidden 2 tubes of mustard I had prepared earlier. As soon as her back was turned, I swapped them with the doctor's ointments, slipping the real medicine away. My hands moved quickly, confidently, as though I had practiced this moment 100 times. When I entered the hospital room, Julian lay pale, his voice hoarse. "Juliet, I can explain." I placed the tube of mustard on the bedside table and looked him in the eye, my voice flat. "Don't." Allison turned her face away, her hair tangled, her eyes swollen from tears. Shame clung to her like a second skin. I walked out before either of them could speak again. Moments later, their screams ripped through the hallway. Allison's voice was shrill, broken. "It burns! My skin is on fire!" Julian groaned, cursing, thrashing in his bed. Nurses rushed in. "Get saline! Neutralize it!" one shouted. Doctors swarmed around them, trying to soothe the chaos, but the humiliation was already irreversible. In the corridor, patients and visitors whispered as the truth spread. "That's them, the ones from the video this morning." A woman hissed to her companion. "The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law. What filth!" Another voice answered coldly. "They deserve every bit of it." I sat silently on the bench, my face calm, my pulse steady. The scandal was no longer confined to whispers in my neighborhood. It had reached the hospital walls, and soon it would spread even further. And when the world pointed at them, they would have no escape. Hours later, the hallway grew quiet again. The chaos had subsided, but the humiliation lingered in every whisper that floated through the hospital. I sat with my purse in my lap, waiting. Not for the nurses, not for the doctors, but for the moment I had prepared. Daniel appeared at the end of the corridor, his uniform still on, his face ashen. He carried a thick envelope, the one I had told him to retrieve from the drawer at home. He didn't speak as he handed it to me. His eyes were hollow, emptied of the son I once knew, and filled only with grief. I opened the envelope, sliding out the evidence I had collected. Photographs, receipts, videos, every damning piece. At the bottom lay 2 documents I had added weeks earlier, long before I admitted to myself how badly I might need them: divorce papers. Without a word, I entered the hospital room. Julian and Allison lay in separate beds, their skin blotched and raw, their dignity stripped away. The air stank of ointment and antiseptic, but it couldn't mask the stench of betrayal that clung to them. I placed the folder on the table between their beds, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. 40 years of marriage end here. Sign these papers, then do whatever you want, but you will disappear from my son's life and from mine. Julian's face twisted, his voice trembling. "Juliet, please listen to me. I didn't—" I cut him off, my tone cold, merciless. "Don't speak. Every word you say only makes it worse." Allison turned to Daniel, her eyes wet, her voice pleading. "Honey, forgive me. I made a mistake. Please, I beg you." But Daniel didn't look at her. His jaw clenched, his gaze as hard as stone. Without a word, he turned and walked out, leaving her sobbing in her bed. Julian reached out weakly toward me, his hand shaking. "Juliet, please." I stepped back, my eyes unflinching. "You chose this path." The nurse entered then, her voice stern. "Quiet, sir. This is a hospital." I left, without another word, my heels clicking sharply against the sterile floor. In the hallway, I found Daniel leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. His voice was barely a whisper when I touched his shoulder. "Mom, why did it have to be Dad? Why her?" I pulled him into my arms, holding him tightly. My own heart was broken, but his was shattered. Together, in that cold corridor, we mourned not only a marriage, not only a family, but the death of trust itself. The scandal didn't fade, it spread like wildfire. Within days, Mrs. Peterson's video of Julian and Allison being carried from the house in disgrace circled the neighborhood, then the town, and soon the internet. Strangers whispered their names, gossiped in grocery stores, shook their heads in church pews. They were no longer just my betrayers. They were a spectacle. But humiliation, no matter how public, didn't erase the emptiness inside me. At night, I sat at the bakery's kitchen table, staring at the oven's glow, remembering all the years I had fought for my dream. I had poured everything, my sweat, my youth, my heart into building this life. and the two people who should have been my closest allies had tried to steal it. Daniel moved back in with me shortly after that day. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He simply appeared at the doorway with his suitcase, his shoulders heavy with sorrow. "Mom, I want to stay here for a while," he said softly. "I'll help with the bakery, whatever you need." I hugged him, feeling the weight of his pain pressed against mine. "You don't have to explain," I whispered. "You're home." From then on, mornings were quieter, but steadier. We opened the bakery together, me preparing trays of sweet bread and flan, Daniel handling invoices, calls, and deliveries. Customers came in droves, their smiles filled with pity but also admiration. "Juliet, you're so strong," they would say, their voices tinged with respect. "The whole town is proud of you." I smiled and thanked them, but inside, I felt like I was piecing myself together with fragments of a shattered heart. Strength, I realized, isn't the absence of pain, it's carrying it with dignity. At night, Daniel and I sat together at the kitchen table, eating simple meals, rice with beans, bread with coffee. The empty chairs across from us reminded me of what had been lost. Yet, in that quiet, there was also something new, a bond between mother and son, raw and unspoken. One evening, Daniel gave me a faint smile, the first I'd seen in weeks. "Mom, can you make me some flan this weekend? The way you used to?" My throat tightened. "Of course," I said, relief washing through me. "But you'll have to help me stir the caramel." He chuckled softly, and in that small sound, I heard the faintest echo of hope. Still, every time I looked at him, I saw the wound in his eyes, the betrayal he had witnessed with his own hands, his own wife, his own father. It was a wound that time might dull, but never fully heal. And as for me, I had my bakery, my son, my dignity, but I no longer had a husband. I no longer had the family I thought I knew. The truth had burned everything else to ashes. Weeks passed, yet the echoes of that day lingered in every corner of our lives. The bakery thrived more than ever. Customers came in waves, not just for the pastries, but to offer comfort cloaked in admiration. "Juliet, you're an inspiration," they would say, holding my hands, their eyes warm. I smiled politely, nodded graciously. But when they left, I often found myself standing alone in the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of sugar and flour, wondering if strength was only another mask I had learned to wear. Daniel kept himself busy. He buried his pain in work, helping me with deliveries, handling the books, even charming customers when they came through the door. But in the quiet moments, when the laughter of the bakery faded, I saw the heaviness in his eyes. He rarely spoke of Allison, and never of Julian. The silence between us was thick, but I understood it. Some wounds cannot be named without bleeding anew. At night, the house felt emptier than ever. No creak of Julian's footsteps, no clink of his glass in the kitchen. Only Daniel and I, sitting across from each other at the small table, eating meals too simple for the cavern of loss that hung between us. Sometimes he would tell me about his work as a firefighter, the dangers, the rescues, the moments that still made him proud. One evening, after describing a fire at the market, he paused and looked at me. His voice was quiet, trembling, yet resolute. "Mom, don't worry. I'll never leave you alone." Those words cut through me, soft as they were. A promise from the only piece of family I still trusted. I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, as though that bond could hold us both above the ruins of what we had lost. But when I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I knew the silence would never truly leave us. It had settled into our bones. The betrayal had written itself into our lives so deeply that even if the world forgot, we never could. And so, Daniel and I carried on two survivors of a family consumed by its own secrets. The bakery oven still glowed, the flan still baked golden, the bell on the door still rang with customers. To the world, it looked like we had triumphed, but inside, I knew better. What remained was not triumph, it was survival. Life in town moved forward, but the scandal never really disappeared. Even as weeks slipped into months, I would still catch whispers when I walked to the market. Women lowered their voices as I passed, men shook their heads, and children stared with the blunt curiosity only youth can afford. Julian, And Allison, they would murmur, as though saying the names too loudly might summon misfortune. Every corner of the neighborhood carried their ghost. At church, people offered me pity in soft handshakes. At the bakery, customers leaned close and whispered how proud they were of me for surviving, for being the strong one. And in the quiet of the evenings, when I sat with Daniel in our little kitchen, I would hear the faint echoes of those names in my own mind. Julian, Allison. Their betrayal was etched into me like a scar. Daniel bore it differently. He didn't complain, didn't rage, but sometimes I caught him staring out the window, his jaw tight, his eyes empty. He had lost more than I had. A father, a wife, a future he had once imagined. Now he buried his grief in work and silence, carrying his wounds quietly, like a man walking with stones in his pockets. I longed to ease his burden, but I knew I couldn't. Some pains belong only to the one who carries them. And so we built our new life in the shadow of what had been destroyed. Each day at the bakery was another layer of routine, another chance to pretend normalcy. Customers smiled. Mrs. Peterson often stopped by with neighborhood gossip, and for a moment I could almost convince myself that life was simple again. But every night, when I closed the shop and turned the key, I felt the weight return. 40 years of marriage gone. My family fractured. My heart, though steady, still bleeding in silence. I told myself I had survived. But survival comes with its own echo, the constant reminder of what was lost. And though the world now called me strong, I knew the truth. I was only a woman who had been broken and learned how to keep moving. Time didn't mend anything. It merely taught me how to carry the weight without dropping it. I began to carve out small rituals to make the days bearable. On Wednesdays, after the morning rush at the bakery, I walked to the community center with a tray of still warm flan and joined a circle of women my age. We traded recipes and stories, burnt caramel disasters, the secret pinch of salt that makes custard sing, the way grief can sneak into a kitchen and salt the soup with tears. They laughed easily, and sometimes I did too, though my laughter always felt like a borrowed garment presentable, but not mine. On Sundays, I sat near the stained glass windows at church. Colored light spilled across my hands like a blessing I wasn't sure I deserved. I didn't pray for Julian or Allison. I prayed for Daniel, for the fierce, quiet boy inside the uniform who now slept under my roof, and for the steadiness to keep showing up to the ovens, the ledger, the life I refused to abandon. When the choir rose and the hymn trembled in the rafters, I closed my eyes and asked only this: to endure without turning into stone. Back at the bakery, the bell chimed and faces I'd known for years stepped through the door with new softness in their eyes. "Juliet, your flan saved my grandson's birthday," someone would say. Or, "Your sweet bread tastes like the summers I thought I'd forgotten." I thanked them, sealed boxes with string, made change with flour-dusted fingers. The ovens glowed, and the air hummed with vanilla and sugar, and if I stood very still, I could almost believe the warmth belonged to me again. At night, when I turned the sign to closed, I ran a cloth over the glass case and studied my reflection older. Yes, carved by disappointment and smoke and sleeplessness. But there was something else, too. Not triumph, not peace, a steadiness, a spine of iron, threaded through soft places. I turned off the lights and listened to the ovens sigh as they cooled, like animals settling in the dark. Then I locked the door and carried the keys home, their weight a small, solid proof. This, at least, was still mine. Living with Daniel was both comfort and sorrow. Each morning he rose early, pulling on his uniform before dawn, the smell of smoke and sweat clinging faintly to him when he returned. He threw himself into work, perhaps to escape the hollow ache that lingered in our house. At the bakery, he was steady, reliable. He handled the register, charmed the customers with polite nods, answered the phone with quiet efficiency. The townspeople loved him, always had. They whispered behind the counter about his strength, about how tragedy seemed to have forged him into a man of steel. But I knew better. I saw the cracks. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find him sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at nothing, his hands clasped tightly together, his jaw clenched as though holding back words he couldn't bear to speak. I never pressed him. A mother knows when silence is a shield. One night, I broke the quiet. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you ever think about her?" His shoulders stiffened, his gaze fixed on the table. After a long pause, he whispered, "Every day, but not the way I used to." I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. His skin was warm, but his pulse raced beneath it. "You don't have to be strong all the time," I told him. He finally looked at me, his eyes dark and heavy. "Mom, I wasn't strong enough to stop it. I let them fool me, both of them." His voice cracked on the last word. My heart splintered. "No," I said firmly. "You didn't fail. They did. You gave love. You trusted. That's not weakness. That's humanity." For the first time since everything collapsed, he let the mask slip. His eyes brimmed with tears, he quickly blinked away, his chest rising and falling unevenly. He turned his face aside, ashamed of the emotion. I squeezed his hand tighter. "You're all I have left, Daniel, and I swear I'll never let anyone take that from me." He nodded silently, but I knew the wound inside him was still raw. Some nights, the silence in our home felt like a third presence, one neither of us could banish, one that whispered both of their names. And yet, sitting there with him, I also knew this. The silence hadn't broken us. Not yet. By the time autumn settled in, the scandal had woven itself into the fabric of the town. At the market, whispers floated behind me like shadows. At church, heads turned, and though many offered me pity, their eyes still carried curiosity. Even at the bakery, my sanctuary, there were moments when the bell chimed and I caught the hushed voices of customers who thought I couldn't hear. "They say she planned it." "No, she's too dignified for that." "But imagine your husband and your daughter-in-law." I pretended not to notice, handing over boxes tied with string, smiling politely. But inside, every word stung. Mrs. Peterson remained my staunch ally. She visited almost daily, her presence a shield against the gossip. Over coffee one afternoon, she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Juliet, people will talk until they find someone new to chew on. But let me tell you, this town doesn't pity you. They admire you. You endured what would have broken most." I wanted to believe her. And yet, admiration is a double-edged sword. It places you on a pedestal you never asked for, one you must balance on while carrying wounds no one else can see. Daniel heard the whispers too. One evening after closing the bakery, he slammed a tray onto the counter harder than necessary. "They look at us like we're a tragedy to gossip over," he muttered. His voice trembled with anger he rarely let slip. I touched his arm gently. "Let them look. Let them talk. They don't know our truth, and they never will." But when I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized the cruel irony. Truth had destroyed us, yet it had also saved us. It was the fire that burned my marriage to ash, but also the flame that illuminated who was truly loyal, who still stood by my side. The town judged, the world whispered, but within those walls, it was just Daniel and me, and that had to be enough. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life found its rhythm again. The bakery bell rang each morning. Customers streamed in with their familiar smiles, and the ovens glowed with the steady heartbeat of survival. Yet beneath the surface, the fractures remained. Daniel stayed close. He worked beside me, lifting flour sacks with ease, calling hotels to confirm orders, running deliveries with a quiet efficiency that spoke more of distraction than passion. Sometimes, when I caught him staring into the distance, his face hardened, I knew he was somewhere else back in that house, back in that bedroom, reliving the sight no son should ever see. I tried to fill the silence with small comforts. Flan on Sundays, fresh bread at dawn, evenings spent watching the town square from the porch. He rarely spoke of Julian or Allison, but I could feel the weight pressing on him. The betrayal hadn't just stolen his trust, it had carved away his future. As for me, I poured myself into the bakery. Every tray of pastries, every golden crust, every soft custard was another brick in the wall I built around my grief. Customers saw resilience. I felt only endurance. Still, their words, "Juliet, you're remarkable. Juliet, you're stronger than all of us," became the armor I wore to face each day. One evening, as we sat over a simple meal, Daniel looked up from his plate. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Mom, do you think it will ever stop hurting?" I set down my fork, my throat tightening. "No," I admitted softly. "But it will change. Pain becomes something you carry differently over time. It won't always feel this sharp. One day, it will feel like a shadow, always there, but not always cutting." He nodded slowly, staring into his food, as though trying to believe me. In that moment, I realized something undeniable. I had lost a husband, yes. I had lost the illusion of family, yes. But I had not lost everything. I still had Daniel. And together, even wounded, even scarred, we were still standing. The world saw me as victorious, as though I had won by surviving. But in truth, there were no winners here, only remnants. And sometimes, remnants are all you can cling to. Winter crept in quietly, frosting the bakery windows and coating the mornings in pale gray light. Inside, the ovens burned bright, the smell of flan and sweet bread drifting into the street. Customers still came, their voices warm, their hands lingering in mine as they said, "Juliet, you've endured so much. You're an example to us all." I smiled politely, but I knew better. Endurance is not glory. Survival is not victory. It is only breathing through the ache. Julian and Allison had vanished from town life. Whispers said they had left. Others claimed they stayed hidden behind closed curtains. I didn't care. Their names had become like ash in my mouth, weightless, bitter, scattered by the wind. At night, Daniel and I shared simple dinners. Rice, bread, sometimes only coffee. He spoke more now about fires he fought, about the men on his team, about the world outside our four walls. But never about her, never about him. And I never forced him to. Some silences are kinder than words. One Sunday, as we closed the bakery, he lingered at the doorway, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. "Mom," he said, his voice low but steady, "you know, even after everything, I'm glad we still have this place. I'm glad we still have each other." I touched his arm, the weight of 40 years of loss and love pressing in my chest. "Yes," I whispered, "we still have each other." The truth is, there were no victors in this story. Not Julian, who traded love for betrayal. Not Allison, who traded loyalty for ambition. Not even me, who uncovered the truth and stood tall. The cost was too great. Trust destroyed, family fractured, a son scarred, a wife hollowed. And yet, the oven still glowed, the flan still baked, the bell on the door still rang with life. I hadn't won. I had only survived. Sometimes, survival is the only ending we are given.